This is an episode of Surprise Student, which is an episode that we put out on our Patreon feed for subscribers. If you want to hear this episode regularly and you want to hear all the different Surprise Students that we have, you can go to patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast and sign up for as little as £2 a month, which is less than a Tesco meal deal every month. So head to patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast and get all these regular bonus episodes in your feed. Hey, awesome listeners. Before we dive into today's episode, I've got a small request. If you're enjoying the podcast, could you take just a moment to go and rate and review it on whatever podcast platform you're using? It costs nothing. It takes a brief moment, but it really means the world to us. Your feedback helps other people discover the show. So if you can hit that review button, share your thoughts. It's quick, it's free, but it really does make a huge, huge difference to what we're doing. Now let's jump into today's episode. You're listening to the Forest School Podcast. Delicious waffle chat about education, nature connection, child development, community building, and lots more. Hosted by Lewis Ames and Wem Sutherland. Well, let's just start with lots of drinking noises.
I know, perfect.
That's how professionals start, and we're professionals now.
We so are. We're like different people. We've had a personality transplant, listeners. You'll notice now.
No. Same old, but in a shiny new packet. Guys, you might have noticed, some of you will have seen, the podcast has changed a bit. The podcast has got a different picture. People might have clicked on this for the first time because it's got a different picture, which doesn't have our disembodied faces on it, which we've had people say that they think that we're only people with faces. So now perhaps they will just think that we are a pair of headphones. Yeah, we've had a bit of a makeover. We've had a bit of we have sort of realised that the podcast is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it needs to take a little step away from the work that we're doing in the woods. So we're still going to be posting stuff on our Children of the Forest page, but we'll be sharing it because originally we'll be coming from the separate channels now, from the Forest School Podcast page on Facebook and on Instagram, and also a new website. So if you go and look on theforestschoolpodcast.com, you can find loads of stuff about us and about how to get in touch with the podcast and new juicy bits that we weren't previously able to do, but we can now, including with this lovely new logo, putting out some lovely new merch. So if you have been thinking about supporting the podcast by buying something like that, but you've always been a bit like, I don't want your disembodied face on my stuff, please, thank you. Then now you can get it with this nice, it's very calming, and all the colours are like green and brown and orange and lovely foresty colours. So you can go to theforestschoolpodcast.com and have a look at some of that new merch. And today we are testing out, so we're going to do a big push. We've been trying different things out with the Patreon for a while, but we have come up with some ideas for bonus episodes. So if you are a Patreon supporter, you'll be able to get these episodes. I don't know how frequently we'll do them, hopefully fairly frequently through the month. And that will mean that you get access to these. So we're going to be doing a couple. We're going to do pop culture pedagogy, where we have a look at some different teaching, either from films or TV or books, and kind of just chatting about it as if it were real life, as if what's happening on the screen or on the pages is real. We're going to be having a go at something called Surprise Student, where one of us pitches a fictional student to the other one, and we come up with a session plan based around what we know of that person's needs. So it could be Bart Simpson, or it could be Dewey from Malcolm in the Middle, or it could be Bugs Bunny, who knows. And also, I've forgotten the third one.
Questions from listeners.
That's
help surgeries.
We're going to be doing the pedagogy surgery. We've got a section on our website now where you can send in anonymous questions, and we've had a couple anonymous questions already because we put a bit of a shout out. So these are questions that might be too awkward, or you don't feel like you can summarize it all, and you don't really want all that stuff going out on Facebook, but we can all learn together from these questions as they come in. So we're going to try out these formats today, and if hopefully they'll be great and we'll be able to rock and roll with them, but we'll see how we get on. So we're going to go for some pop culture pedagogy. I'm going to spend way too long on a little jingle now.
Oh yes, please.
Pop culture pedagogy. I picked it this week.
You did.
I picked a clip from the Channel 4 TV show Teachers. Have you ever seen the show before?
I have a long time ago. I was trying to work out how old this clip is because it's got that guy in who's super famous now.
Andrew Lincoln.
As the student. Yeah, but the student guy.
Oh, James Corden.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's got James Corden
he,
pretending to be a teenager. I reckon he must be in his 20s.
Do you think?
This easily.
He does look very young.
I mean, he's got some baggage going on now, hasn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah, Andrew Lincoln of now The Walking Dead fame. Teachers was I think 4-series TV show. And I would say a little bit like Scrubs or something of that nature. The whole show is not actually about being a teacher. The lessons are like an obstacle that pulls the characters away, or moving up in the school. The school is just like the background, the setting. It's not actually about teaching. But this clip is of Simon, Andrew Lincoln, in the first season when there's a bit more of the classroom action going on, and it's him teaching or attempting to teach a little bit of Shakespeare. We'll put the link in the show notes for people that want to go and have a look. What did you think when you saw it?
Well, it's quite reminiscent of Dead Poets Society in the way that it ends with all the students up in, standing up and cheering and making such a lot of noise that the teacher next door is like, excuse me, what are you doing? My class can't concentrate. And it's in that, so it becomes very quickly, so it starts with him just sort of explaining about Romeo and Juliet and how they are so passionate about their love for each other that they'll do anything.
To a very bored classroom. It's very well staged that they're very, just not interested.
Although they're not interested, but they're not being very disruptive. So I'm not sure that's very realistic.
Yeah, true.
But they're just sort of sat there looking really bored, and he's trying to kind of inspire them and get them into the vibe of the play. And it very quickly becomes a kind of, he says, is there nothing that you felt passionate about that you want to rebel? And one of them says, I'd quite like to play for Bristol City. And he's like, well, you're a very sad individual. How about owning Man United? And everyone's like, oh, and then one of the girls says, I'd like to have sex with Ryan Giggs. And he's literally he's like taking notes and writing on the board, and he literally writes shag Ryan Giggs on the board. So they're like, so he's kind of like, he's trying to inspire them in a way that's kind of appropriate for them, and they're trying to make it relevant to them, which I get. And then he quickly
flips to ego. It flips to ego.
Flips to ego. It's so kind of like, and I'm sure those of us who have worked as teachers have, especially with teenagers, have not necessarily the ego thing, but you're trying to make it so relevant to them that you kind of cross a line of professionalism to get them on side, to build a relationship. Right. And I'm not necessarily saying there's anything wrong with that, because as long as you are not being completely unprofessional, but you're being a little bit, you're being a bit surprising, I guess.
Yeah.
That is because teaching is so much about building a relationship with individuals and a group, isn't it? That you don't want to be their mate, though, and that's kind of where he's stepping into.
It starts moving on, and the kids start shouting out,
one of you.
The kids start shouting out stuff like, "Simon, you're the best teacher ever." Exactly. Yeah, I want you to teach them. And I think from the way it's shot, it suddenly has gone off in his head. Like, they are probably still shouting out things they would like, but what he's hearing is like personal praise. Oh my God, Simon, I love you, and like. Yeah. There's something really relatable about that feeling of like you're mishearing what's going on in the classroom, because it becomes, so much of your teaching day can be quite like an uphill struggle, like anything is like, hey, do you want to do this? No, don't want to. Okay, but I have to force you, I have to coerce you to do. So the second you get any sort of a downhill roll, it becomes like, yes, I mean, downhill in a good way, like the roll is getting speed up. You start to go, yes, I've done it. I've cracked it. I'm perfect. I can go with this. Yes. And
I know. And then, yeah, and you do have to, and especially working with teenagers, you kind of do have to watch yourself, because in in order to build that relationship, then it's really helpful to kind of be honest about certain bits of your personality or certain things that you're interested in order to build that relationship and to
yeah.
make it worthwhile and meaningful for both sides, but only to a point,
Oh yeah.
like that invisible line about actually now it's not professional, or now you're beginning to undermine other teachers, for
Hmm.
example. Definitely that thing of like, oh, my class loves me so much they're going to be stamping on the floor, and I don't care if that like disrupts somebody else, or I know so and so that teacher over there might force you to do this, but I'm not going to, because like I'm your mate.
I'm not like
Like
the other
that is
girls.
so,
Yeah.
oh god, it's so, ugh, icky, isn't it? Really icky. It's almost like a sort of team rivalry. And I have had teachers who've done that before, who've gone like, we're going to do this, class next door, we're going to make sure that we're better than them at this thing, or they're doing it in a really boring way, right? So we're going to do this learning in a really
Yeah.
fun way.
Which I
And
will say, can I have had that work? But what I have done is beforehand in the staff room, or when I've seen the teacher go, "Hey, I'd like to set up this with my class. Are you all right being the foil?" And knowing that this goes on, and maybe next to class you can amp it up, or maybe you can do whatever. But you got to check in first. You don't just throw someone professionally under the bus, which
yeah.
can be one of the really tempting things when you are in schools delivering forest school, is definitely that you can quite easily, I think, fall into that trap of like, if someone comes out and it's like, oh well, we're not allowed to jump in, well, I'm the cool forest school teacher and I say we
Yeah.
can, da da da, and like
Yeah.
that is that pull to be like counterculture, and you know, that kind of thing is really strong, I think, because a lot of forest school is counterculture, and then you can get wrapped up in whether what the learners are enjoying is the counterculture or you personally. But then I
Yeah.
really like the end of this clip where he's, letting all the kids out the classroom and just goes up to this other teacher who's this other teacher next door has come in and shouting and said, could you make a bit more noise, we're finding it too easy to concentrate, blah, blah, blah. But then he obviously takes that personally because it was attacking his little moment in the spotlight, and comes up and, could you just undermine me a bit more? I'm beginning to think, I can't remember the line, it's something like, my class don't think I'm enough of a twat already. And like, it's just deflection. It's just like, he knows he fucked up, but there's something where you can just go, I'll just throw that back at you.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
very human, I think. This show, for me, I watched it, I think, before I did my teacher training, but possibly when I was at doing my undergraduate. So I knew I was going to go into teaching, but I hadn't actually done any teaching yet. And I found it a really interesting show because it is about essentially a group of teachers, most of whom are not in it vocationally. For the most part, they are there because I think there might even be a couple of episodes where they're like, well, I don't know how I ended up teaching. I just did the thing. They offered me the money and I turned up one day and now I've been teaching 10 years. Or it's a really interesting take on teaching, because I think lots of media stuff portrays teaching as one of those like deep, it's got to be deeply vocational, you must love it, everyone who does it is, most people who teach in the UK at least are self-sacrificing. It's not a well-paid job. It is a job that you go into because you love it. It's interesting to see that flip side of, this TV show is 20, 25 years old now, when there probably was a bit more money in teaching. You probably could get, but um, possibly different because it's all set in a secondary school, which I guess would speak to your experiences a bit more than mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about the differences between, so having to play that persona of that teacher to try, and you're like, you saying it's about persuading people to do things,
Mm.
and me saying it's about like building relationships and trying to get your class on side and whatever strategies you use to try and do that. And then I was thinking about being there and having done, tried to get my class on side and tried to get them on board with learning, compared to running forest school sessions where it's so, apart from safety stuff or like group expectations that people have come up with, it's so seldom about persuading people to do things that it's almost like starting again. It's like, you kind of, and because if you've worked for any length of time in a school, you definitely become institutionalized, and you've got your little things, your little shorthands, your shortcuts for things, for building relationships quickly, or making sure that a class kind of behaves to the standard that the school might expect, or all those kind of things. And I think it's quite a long process to let go of some of those. And definitely, we've had chats with different practitioners at different stages of their practice, and people kind of really floundering in terms of, but what am I actually doing? And we've talked about that a lot in terms of what that feels like when you're used to those pressures from the kids and from on high and from the government and all those things on you that are just kind of honing your teacher persona, because you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way, you have to do it that way. Now find your way. Now find your way through this kind of tunnel that's been created for you, and find a way that's manageable and not too icky feeling. So I remember chatting with my housemates when I was doing my teacher training and just like having a bit of a breakdown, because I remember going, God, but this is just making me into a horrible person. Like, I don't want to be this absolute cowbag to these kids. Like, but I have to be. Like, if I don't do that, then I can't do anything or get anywhere. And I'm just not like that. And then, so that feels really hard when you're going into it. And then you get used to it. I'm not saying that I was a cowbag the whole time, but you learn your little techniques so that you don't have to be a cowbag, but you do get results and all this stuff. And then if you're moving from that into forest school, it's almost like you have to unlearn so much of that behaviour, because it isn't the same job. And it's kind of rediscovering why I went into it in the first place, in terms of wanting to work with children and young people. Like, that was my drive going into the job and into the work. And it's almost like you get to forest school and then you've got these kind of long established groups, if you do, and that's like, oh yeah, I now remember this is the nub of why I wanted to do this stuff in the first place, that you don't have to act, you don't have to create this weird persona, and all this kind of, it is sort of what's the word, kind of like almost putting the wool over people's eyes, or like being quite
underhand,
forcing people to do, underhand, or
deceitful.
I don't know what the word is.
What do you want to go for?
Kind of a little bit. Or you're just trying to make people do stuff, aren't you? And to stop having to do that is like, whew, what's left?
Yeah.
What's left when you don't have to force people to do a certain thing anymore?
Yeah. I think there's also something in this in Teachers, the TV show in general, which is like, through the seasons you see people becoming, like you say, institutionalized. And I don't know if this is true for you, but it was definitely true for me. It was like, you're using every tool that you've got tactically. So you're using your facial expressions intentionally. You're using your tone of voice intentionally. You're using where you stand intentionally. You're using like the way you're holding your body intentionally. And you can call it like acting, or you can call it like a persona, or you can call it like masking, or whatever you want to do. Sometimes there were points where I would say, with the knowledge I had, right? Obviously now I might think different things, but with the knowledge I had back then, I think there would have been days where I was like, I have to be a hard ass today to get through what we're doing, to get this behavior sorted, or to do whatever. And actually, I don't think I've got a particularly strong, like in terms of like an osmosis type filter thing, that thing of like, I've in air quotes, pretended to be grumpy all day. And how many days in a row can you pretend to be grumpy before you just are grumpy? Like that you can't fully put on that like stern act role thing without some of it seeping in. And I think a lot of the Teachers TV show explored that idea of like people moving up into upper management, or being heads of year, and a combination of like stressful influences, but also I'm telling people off all day, so I become a person that tells people off. So when I go to the pub, I'm still telling people off, because that's what I've ingrained to do.
Yeah.
And like you say, for forest school
Yeah.
is that other thing where you get like, it almost, I would say, for me, has gone the other way, where you get so used to like, hey, we're just children, we're doing the other thing. And like any confrontation that I find now hits me way harder because I'm like, whoa, what's
Yeah.
this? We don't do that shit here. We just,
Absolutely. Anytime, that's very true. Anytime I have to tell, we've been talking about this, anytime I do literally have to tell somebody to do something or not do something,
yeah,
outside of the kids in forest school, I have a little freak out because I'm so unused to doing it. I'm like, how do I do this in a non-demand, all the
oh yeah,
research and reading that I've done and my practice, how do I now transfer this to a moment where I really do have to say, don't do that, or can I
yeah,
ask you to do this, or whatever. Also, I definitely think in terms of like my teacher persona, I'm kind of, it's funny having this time to chat about it because I'm really reminiscing about it, and there's parts of it I do miss in a weird kind of way, because it is this persona of like efficiency and professionalism and like
you can pretend to be that now if you want. I won't stop you. I'm joking a
it's
bit.
it's so weird. And like even the clothes that I used to have to wear,
That's part of
it
the
was
persona.
exhausting.
That's
It
part of
was
the like, yeah,
exhausting. It is. And the shoes and what noise the shoes make when you walk down the corridor and all those kind of things. And I was reading a thread about ADHD and teaching the other day, and lots of ADHDers going, teaching was the absolute perfect job for me. It's like changing all the time, really social, really like 1 minute to the next
mm,
minute, dopamine joy. Like, if you
yeah,
have any of those little wins in the classroom, it's like, yes, result, yes, it's like achieve, achieve, achieve. Now it's a different thing. Now it's a different thing. You're really busy, meeting, playground duty. It's so unboring because you've got all of these amazing spontaneous interactions,
yeah,
and the kids you're working with are so interesting and funny and all the rest of it. That and I got shit done. I was on it. That's the word I would use. I was just like on it as a teacher.
mm.
And then but then the minute your demands in your home life go up, then it becomes unsustainable. And that's what a lot of these they're all
Or if you
female
just can't get yourself
ADHD is.
to focus on a thing, you can't find the dopamine. I never ever found a single drop of dopamine in marking a book, not once, not ever.
Mm,
And so that is like
yeah.
insurmountable as a task. Whereas like you asked me to plan like history lessons and then go and do some PE and then
Mm,
build musical instruments, like, all right, yeah, boom, 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 let's go,
yeah.
let's go, let's
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
thing. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I
Oh,
think that's why I could never do primary, because there's so many things there that I couldn't.
so many rabbit holes. You've got to be so good at like picking
And
your
lots of things
rabbit
I
hole
just
for the
wouldn't find
day.
any dopamine in. I just like,
Oh, okay.
nah. Do you know what? That's not an important part of the curriculum. Let's never do
I
maths
was talking to someone the other
ever.
day. This is a very off-topic thing. Someone that comes to one of our groups went to the same school as me. She's like 2 years below, and we managed to link up again.
Mm.
20 years on in the thing. But she was saying, "Do you remember big books in primary school?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She was like, they were like big A3 book versions of normal storybooks. Like you'd have the normal storybook in the library, but also the teacher had a big, each page was
Mm.
A3, and you'd hold it out. I'm miming this, but people can't
You
hear
still
on the
get those in
podcast.
the library when they do storytelling at the
But
library.
it's such a like, I hadn't remembered that at all. And she was like, yeah, do you remember those? I'm like, yeah, oh my God, I do remember those. That's a weird thing. Anyway. And now, at the end of the podcast, we want to say a massive thank you to the people that are supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/The Forest School Podcast. But we want to say a massive thank you to Karen, to Catherine, Gareth, Rebecca, Rosie, Julie, Rachel, Candice, Claire, Heidi, Louise, Michael, and Anna. Thank you so much, guys. And we'll see you all next time.